Hello friends, welcome again. Friends, structuralism. This is a very tricky topic which most of the students find very difficult to understand. And friends, don't worry, in today's lecture we are going to understand it in a very simpler, easier manner. Friends, structuralism is a modern literary movement. It is a literary theory in the field of criticism which was developed by Ferdinand de Saussure. Remember this name Ferdinand because he is considered as the founder, as the father of structuralism in literature, in European and American literature. Friends, when we come to the 20th century, modern literature, okay, that means when we talk about the first half of the 20th century, 1900 to 1950, we have different theories like Symbolism, Imagism, Expressionism, Existentialism, Structuralism, and so on. But among all these theories, structuralism is considered as the most important critical theory in literature. Ferdinand de Saussure, he was a Swiss linguist. Swiss means he lived in Switzerland, okay, and he was a linguist. Linguist means a person who studies language, a person who is doing research in the field of language. So Ferdinand was a man, a thinker living in Switzerland. He studied linguistics and philosophy. Okay, he propounded means he developed a new theory in the field of language, which was later on known as structuralist theory, which was later on known as structuralism. Okay, now Ferdinand basically he believed that language should be taken as a social and cultural phenomenon, right? Language you cannot separate from the society, you cannot separate language from the tradition, from the culture, okay? And he believed that language and meaning are governed, are controlled by two things, Langue and Parole. Friends, we are going to discuss these terms in detail later in this video, okay? But let me give you a brief background to understand structuralism. Friends, structuralism, the word which is hidden in this term is the word structure. Structure means dhacha. Okay, everything in this world has its own structure. Nothing in this world can exist without structures. Let me give an example. Like this whole solar system, right? It has its own structure. It has a sun, it has some planets, every planet has some country, planet has some continents, continents have some countries, countries are subdivided into states and states into districts and all, okay. So if you examine, the whole solar system has its own structure. In the same manner, you take an example of human body. Okay, human body has its own structure. Human body is made of skin, blood, bones, muscles, and everything is governed by two things. One, your heart, which is pumping blood into all parts to all parts of your body, and everything is governed by your nervous system, that means your brain, right? So it has its own structure, human body. You take this example, as you can see in this picture, on the left hand side there is a brick. Now brick is in itself a complete structure. Brick is made of sand, of cement and clay and everything, right? So brick has its own structure. So brick is complete in itself, but then we believe that only brick is useless, right? Brick is of no use, but the same bricks, when they come together and make a proper structure, it becomes a building which is very useful for mankind. Okay, so the building has its own structure. Buildings are made of the bricks, but brick has its own structure, right? So everywhere, wherever you go, you cannot find anything which has no structure. Everything in this world has its own structure. Now let me give an example from literature. We are the students of literature. In literature also we find structures, like when we study drama, it has some structure, like it has plot, character, dialogue, thought, philosophy of life. Everything come together to make a complete structure which is known as a drama, right? Even if you take plot, okay, plot is one element of this structure of drama, but plot itself has its own structure, right? As you can see in this diagram, like plot has exposition, then rising action, then climax, then falling action, and then resolution, and denouement. Denouement means the end. Okay, so it has its own structure, plot, and plot is used in drama, and drama has so many different elements which make it a drama, a complete drama. So friends, we cannot escape from structuralism. Structuralism is actually not a new concept for us, right? We have been studying structures in literature when we are studying sonnets. Say for example, when you study a sonnet, it has its own structure of 14 lines, it has its own meter, it has its own rhyming scheme, and everything make a Shakespearean sonnet, okay, a different structure we have which makes it a Petrarchan sonnet, a different structure which we have, it makes it a Miltonic sonnet, Spenserian sonnet. Every sonnet has its own structure, and literature must be studied as per considering these all structures as we study, right? Now let me give you an idea to understand this structuralism, right? To understand structuralism, first of all, you need to understand the difference of criticism that we find during modern era and the traditional 19th or 18th century, right? Before 1920s, the critics used to interpret literature as singular works, right? Okay, for example, William Wordsworth during the in the beginning of the 19th century, he wrote the poem Daffodils, right? And the critics used to criticize that poem, and that poem was known as a work of art, okay? And that work of art was considered as complete in itself, right? So the meaning according to the 19th century critics come from that singular work of art. So meaning was close-ended, right? During the 19th century, 18th century, 17th century. But after 1920s, if you come to the modern era, the whole scene is changed. Okay, here the critics' approach towards literature is totally changed. Now the poems, the novels, the plays, they were not considered as works of arts, they were considered as texts. Okay, so their focus was more on text. Now what's the difference between text and work of art? A work of art is complete. It has language, it has meter, it has rhythm and everything, right? But text means language. Text means the use of language. So the 20th century critics after 1920s, they focused their attention to study the language used by the poets in that particular text, whether it is a drama or a novel or a short story or a poem, whatever, right? So works were now considered as texts. Now texts, what are these texts? Texts, as I told you, they are nothing but linguistic structures. Structures means, for example, a poem, right? A poem is, according to the modern critics, the poem is a linguistic structure, and texts have their own language, and language has multiple interpretations, right? By understanding the language, the critics should develop a lot of meanings out of the text. So the 20th century critics, structuralists, they believed that language which is used, which is the most important part of the text, which is used by the poet, it gives us so many multiple meanings, and meanings come from where that we are going to discuss. So I have presented this comparison. Before 1920s, the literature, the pieces of literature, they were known as works. Okay, after 1920s, they are now known as texts. Literature was taken as a work of art before 1920s. After 1920s, they are known as texts. Literary works were interpreted considering the biographical, the historical and comparative methods, right? If you have studied Taine gave us the formula of race, milieu and moment. He believed that before understanding the work, the critic must see the race, milieu and moment. Saint-Beuve also talked about the biographical study of the author, biographical study of the literature, and he said that you need to understand the author first to understand the work of art. So during the 19th century, the focus was not on the work of art, the focus was on where the author comes from, what is his tradition, what is his race, during which period he was living. All this was the focus. So focus was not on the works of art, it was somewhere else. But if you come to the 20th century, all biographical, social, philosophical criticism was discarded, was rejected, and now the focus is mainly on the text which is written by the author, right? Meanings were before 1920s, the meanings came from by focusing on the works itself and the author, right? The work and the author, meaning comes from there. But if you talk about 1920s, meaning comes from the text itself, from the language used by the poet. Okay, before 1920s, the works were closed-ended and conveyed limited meanings, right? But after 1920s, they were considered as texts, and texts are open-ended, they convey multiple meanings, right? So having created this background, let's now try to understand the theory of structuralism as developed by Ferdinand. Ferdinand taught linguistics. Okay, let me give you some basic information, biographical information about this scholar. Ferdinand was a teacher of linguistics at School of Advanced Studies in Paris. Okay, for 10 years he taught linguistics there. He also taught Indo-European linguistics and Sanskrit for yet another 10 years from 1901 to 1911. Okay, let me tell you, Ferdinand was a great Sanskrit scholar, right? In fact, he did his PhD in Sanskrit language and literature, right? He taught linguistics and Sanskrit in University of Geneva from 1907 to 1911. So all during his lifetime, whatever lectures he delivered, they were compiled by his colleagues and by his students, and these lectures were written down by the students and the scholars, right, and they were published under the title of a book, Course in General Linguistics, which was published after his death in 1915. Now remember, this work is very important. Course in General Linguistics, published in 1915. It brought about a revolutionary new change in modern criticism. It brought about a new theory of structuralism. Okay, now to understand this theory, we need to understand several terms as given by Ferdinand in his lectures, right? So the first term is episteme, right? Episteme is what? It is a construct of language. Okay, in order to know anything, you need to learn language. Can you imagine your life without language? No, right? Even when you think about something, you think with the help of language. So language is very important, friends, without which you even cannot think, right? So language is a construct of episteme is a construct of language, which is very important. This is the first term. Now let's go ahead. Ferdinand believed that language is a structure. As a building has its own structure, human body has its own structure, the solar system has its own structure. In the same manner, language also has its own structure. If you examine any language very closely, you will find that it is governed by some rules, right? Like if you talk about English language, we have the proper structure of subject and predicate. Okay, the sentence begins with the subject, followed by the verb, followed by the object. Okay, this is a structure of English language. Moreover, if you examine the words also have their own structure. If you examine the words, whenever you find Q in your word, Q is mostly followed by U, right? So, like for example, quin, quarter, quality, any word you take, Q is always followed by U. So, that means there is some structure in the words. Okay, you cannot use language using consonants. Another example, like only consonants cannot make your language. So language has its structure in which consonants and vowels, okay, swar and vyanjan, both are compulsory, both are needed. So it has its structure in which it is produced. Every language has this structure. Another term which you need to understand is Langue, Langue. Langue means the set of rules. Okay, the same thing which we discussed here, right? Language as a structure. Language has structure means it has some rules, right? So language has Langue. Langue means some rules, right? And we have to follow the rules. And Parole. Parole means the actual use of that language. So when we are speaking this language or when we are writing this language, we have to follow the langue of that language. That means we have to follow the rules of that language. We have to follow the structure of that language, and if we do not follow this, your language becomes meaningless. If you want to give some meaning in your language, you need to follow Langue. And Parole means the actual speech or actual use of language. It means to use the words in your language as per your requirements in different situations, different contexts. Now, friends, these three terms these three terms are very important to understand, and they are sign, signifier and signified. Okay, Ferdinand gave a new concept of sign. Sign means what? Sign means any word or a small unit of language. Say for example, when I say the word chair, right? chair. So chair is a sign, right? When I use the word in written form, chair, it is a sign. When I use the word table, table, it is a sign, right? And now this sign has its two parts, and these two parts are signifier and signified. Okay, signifier and signified. Signifier means what? It means the word which we read, or the sound which we hear, right? One word which is written, that written word is called a sign, and when we read that word, okay, or when somebody speaks a word, it is a sign, but when we listen to that, the sound that we receive is called the signifier. Okay, so signifier means the meaning which we signifier is the sound which we hear, and after hearing the sound, that sound we understand some meaning, so that meaning is known as signified. Three steps. The written word chair is the sign, okay, and when somebody speaks this word chair, you listen to that word chair, it becomes your signifier, and after listening to that word, the picture of chair comes before your mental eyes. The image of chair that comes to your mind is the meaning which is known as signified. Okay, signifier is more important than signified. Now this signifier is very difficult. Why? Because the same sound, when I listen to one sound and if you listen to the same sound, sometimes it so happens that you have some different image in your mind and I have a different image in my mind. Okay, so the sign is same, signifier is same, but sometimes signified is different. Why? What happens? So according to Ferdinand Saussure, the meaning depends upon the culture of the person who receives the signs, who receives the signifiers, right? It depends upon our own bringing up, it depends upon our own social surroundings, depends upon the context in which it is spoken, right? So that's why Ferdinand said that language is arbitrary. Arbitrary means personal, subjective. What I mean you may not mean. Okay, what I understand you may not understand, because I have my own personal power of understanding, you have your own personal power of understanding. Okay, so language, Ferdinand said, is governed by culture, by society, by religion, by tradition, and so many different aspects. Okay, let me give an example. Like if somebody speaks a word tree, right? Then what happens? Now TREE, this tree is a sign, but when you listen to this word, it is a signifier. But three persons, for example, listen to this word. So three persons have their images in their mind. One person might think about the tree of an apple, right? Apple tree. Another person might have an image of a mango tree in his mind, or the third person might have the image of a banyan tree, right? So one word, one sign, one signifier, but the three different meanings come out of that. Okay, it may mean an apple tree, or a mango tree, or a banyan tree. So meaning is arbitrary. Remember these things. Meaning is subjective. It depends upon your personal thinking. And second thing which Ferdinand gave is language is binary. Binary means it has two forces, right? Language is understood by two different forces, right? Meaning can be understood by understanding the binary oppositions of the words. Each word has two binary oppositions. Like language is understood by comparing and contrasting. If somebody says that this is a mobile, right? We use a mobile, right? So why do you say this is a mobile? This is a mobile. Why? Because it is not a tablet. So you are comparing, right? Why this is a mobile? Because it is not a computer, right? So let me give another example. Like if somebody wants to say light, you understand light. How do you understand light? Because you have understood darkness. You just imagine, had there been no darkness in this world, then there would have been it would have been difficult to understand light, the value of light. So light is understood by comparing it with darkness, right? Day is understood by comparing it with the night, right? A chair, it is called a chair. Why? Because it is not a table, right? Bike is bike. Why? Because it is not a car, right? So language, or the words which are used in language, they are binary, right? We understand the meanings, considering the binary oppositions, right? So these are the two theories which he has developed, two concepts which he has developed. Number one, language is binary, right? It is understood by considering two different forces. It is understood by comparing and contrasting. Okay, and second concept is language is arbitrary. Language, the meaning lies in the mind of the reader. So language is personal, right? The meanings come out of the reader's mind because it is subjective, right? So these two concepts which he has developed, and he said that when the critic reads the text, okay, so multiple meanings come out from that text. Why? Because the language is same, the sign is same, okay, but the signified is different. It is different from a person to person, from a critique to critique, from a reader to reader, and that's why texts, these people believed texts have multiple meanings, right? So friends, before we conclude, let me tell you who were the major structuralists of the 20th century. Ferdinand was there. He was the founder of structuralism. Apart from him, there were a host of writers. Host of means there were many other writers and thinkers who followed structuralism in Europe and America. If I talk about Europe, then Roland Barthes, okay, Levi-Strauss, Frank Kermode, David Lodge, they were the important European structuralists. But if we talk about American structuralism, after 1960s, we have Noam Chomsky, Charles Morris, C.S. Peirce, etc. These were the American structuralists. So friends, let's conclude in these 3-4 topics. Number one, Ferdinand de Saussure is considered as the founder, as the father of structuralism during the first half of the 20th century. Okay, this 20th century new criticism focuses not on the works which are closed-ended, it focuses on the text which are considered as open-ended. Open-ended means it has multiple meanings, right? Why? Because meaning is personal, meaning is arbitrary, right? Texts are considered as linguistic structures. So the readers, the critics must study the text itself. The author is dead. That is what Roland Barthes said. Roland Barthes said that you need not study the author, which background he comes from, what is his tradition, during which period he was living, in which social background he was brought up. Nothing is important. Text is important. Why? Because the meaning comes from the text, and text is a linguistic structure, right? Language is arbitrary and binary, and so that's why the texts have so many meanings, multiple meanings. So friends, I hope the idea is clear to you. If you have any doubts or questions, do write to me in the comment section of this channel. Friends, if you really liked this video, please share this video among your friends, and do subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon. Thank you very much.